Just give me the thumbs up.
He karakia kimata. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa paunamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou i te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou, ki hei mauriora.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome to this webinar for the Kaipara District Plan Exposure Draft. Enjoy the webinar and enjoy getting involved with this great opportunity which Kaipara District Council has never had before, to be involved in an exposure draft for the district plan. This is the last ever Kaipara District Plan, so make the most of it. Get stuck in, Kaipara. Kia pai tō rā.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome everybody tonight to our fourth exposure draft district plan webinar. So tonight, very exciting topic, subdivision and zoning. And tonight with me, I have Paul Vanders. Do you want to just say a quick hi there, Paul?
Good evening, everybody, and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Paul. Michael.
Good evening. I'm Michael Day. I'm the Planning Manager here at KDC. I also hope you enjoy the webinar, and please don't forget to give us feedback on our exposure draft by the 16th of September. Thank you.
And last but not least, Megan.
Kia ora koutou, ko Megan Walters, tōku ingoa. I'm the Planning Administrator for the District Plan team.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. So what are we going to talk about tonight? We're going to cover which zones the Kaipara District Council has selected from the National Planning Standards for this exposure draft. We're going to take you through where these zones have been applied across the Kaipara District and what are the proposed lot sizes for each zone. So many of you will be wanting to know whether there's opportunities for subdivision and infill housing, and we're going to take you through that. And where to find information for your property. We're also going to talk about any relevant land use provisions for increased density and development, because it's not just subdivision that creates more housing in Kaipara, but there are some opportunities which we'll talk you through later in the webinar as well. So I'm just going to hand over to Paul Vanders now, who's going to talk a little bit about the journey to date and the spatial plans which Kaipara District Council have.
Thank you, Catherine. Kaipara District Council adopted the spatial plans for the whole of the district in December 2020, which consist of the spatial plans for the urban areas as well as the rural areas. Now, bringing that to the district plan, we have got the strategic direction. And there are 9 of these strategic points that we have to look at. First is we would like to direct growth across the Kaipara district. Secondly, protection of the primary production activities. Then rural lifestyle should be guided to certain areas. The natural environment is recognized and it is promoted. We minimize the risk of natural hazards and provide for those. Recognition of the historic heritage and cultural values, and with that engagement with tangata whenua in all our activities. Then the development of the lifestyle opportunities through a range of zones so that there is choice for the people in Kaipara. And lastly, appropriate services and sustainable infrastructure to actually service these particular areas. Now, in terms of the national planning standards, we have to have certain aspects regarding to the urban areas with urban form and development. And there are four very important aspects that we use to determine where growth is going to be and how growth will manifest itself. First one is infill. We would like to have subdivision and intensification, especially in our urban areas. Would like to see continuous development, not leapfrogging. So we would like to not have jumping development over other areas. The third one is transition, where we have higher densities nearer to the centers and lower densities towards the rural area. And then the last one is, as I mentioned, there has to be a choice for people to be able to live where they would like to live. I'm not going to go into detail, but these were the spatial plans for the urban areas of Dargaville, Mangatoroto, Kaiwaka, and Mangawhai. And when you look on the website to these particular plans, and you compare those with the district plan zonings, these plans, these spatial plans, is for a period of 30 to 50 years, and were the input to the infrastructure strategy, while the district plan deals with 10 to 15 years. So we're not going to implement these immediately in the district plan proposals.
Thanks, Paul. That was a really good summary of the spatial plans. And now I'm just going to take everybody through the overview of the proposed zones that Kaipara District Council are looking to use from the National Planning Standards. So the first ones here on the screen are the residential zones. So we have chosen out of a very long list to use large lot residential, and we'll talk about density sizes a bit later. Low density and medium density. We have selected three commercial industrial zones. So just a general commercial, which includes business areas and a mixed use of activities, residential and commercial, as well as light industry and heavy industry. We also, this is new for the Kaipara District Plan, are introducing 3 open spaces. So the first one's a natural open space, which will largely reflect areas of reserve that are primarily used for recreational activities, so bush reserves, etc. Open space is mostly our recreational spaces like playgrounds, council reserves that are not necessarily bush. And then we've got sport and active recreation zone, which is largely our sport fields and recreational spaces used across the district. Then we've got 4 rural zones. The first one being the general rural zone, which is where most of Kaipara's land falls. Then we've got a more targeted rural production zone, and we'll talk a bit more about this shortly, but the rural production zone is based on protecting Kaipara's highly productive land. The rural lifestyle zone, as Paul said before, we're trying to provide a range of housing options and lifestyle choices for the people of Kaipara. So you'll see in the maps we're about to show you soon that Kaipara will have quite a volume of rural lifestyle opportunity there. We've also got our settlement zone, which is a new zone for Kaipara. And this is largely around our towns and villages where we haven't got a lot of infrastructure, but it enables a little bit of growth and development for those areas. So we'll talk a little bit more about those as we move through this webinar tonight. So just as a snapshot, as Paul said, the zoning maps which we're about to show you are largely based on the spatial plans which were adopted by Council in 2020. We know that we have actually oversupplied land in our towns and villages in this exposure draft, so we're keen to get feedback from the public and particularly landowners and developers who are looking at doing something with their land. It could be that you haven't been zoned or you think that we have zoned too much, and we do want to hear what your thoughts are. So we know that zoning is going to be a really hot topic for Kaipara, and this is a really good opportunity, given it's a draft plan, to give us feedback on what you think the future of Kaipara should look like over the next 10 to 15 years. But just some initial statistics, we are opening up quite a considerable area of residential land, so the 935 hectares is additional. We also have 54 hectares of commercial and business land. So that's quite a significant area of additional, hopefully, economic growth for Kaipara, as well as 127 hectares of industrial land, which is obviously largely significant as well for economic growth. So we are quite confident that this is going to help enable any growth in Kaipara, and hopefully to attract people to Kaipara if the zoning is there. So I'm just going to step through the residential zones. So as Paul said before, it's based around the spatial plans, and the spatial plans talked about how we could expand growth into our areas. And so we've looked at Dargaville, Mangatoroto, Kaiwaka and Mangawhai to accommodate the predicted population growth over the next 10 years. And we have gone a bit above 10 years as well. We are looking a little bit beyond that as well. The spatial plan document was 30 years, so just bear that in mind if you're looking at that document. And then the next point there is to optimise development within the residential zone with different densities, which we will talk you through here as well. So I think the key point which we've highlighted in red there is there's going to be no high density residential development in Kaipara. Well, that's what we're proposing, and we want your views on that. So high density is generally 300, 350 square metres, so the sort of densities you'd expect, for instance, in Auckland. Medium density residential is still small, and at this stage we are looking at 400 to 750 square metre minimum lot size there. So we want your feedback on that. If you think it's too small or too big, we need to know that at this point. But primarily the medium density residential is around our town centres. And I guess the other thing worth noting in that zone as well is that we have provided for multi-unit development and retirement villages as fairly permissive activities in the plan. And that's to enable growth to happen where it's really anticipated and where we've got that infrastructure. The next one is low density development, and we're looking at a 750 minimum square metre area for that zone, and it's a little bit larger than the medium density, and it's generally a little bit further from town centres. And it also accommodates quite a few sites that might have a bit of a challenging topography, remembering that not every site is flat in Kaipara. Large lot residential is going to use 1,000 square metre if you're serviced and 3,000 if you're unserviced. And so quite a few areas across Kaipara may in fact be unserviced in the large lot residential area. And we're hoping that this can be a bit of a transition zone to future medium density or low density development in the future. So generally these areas are located on the outskirts of towns and villages where it might take a little bit longer for us to get infrastructure. There are a whole bunch of performance standards in the district plan. These are around development bulk and scale, so things like site coverage, building heights, building setbacks. If you're thinking of building a new house in the next 5 to 10 years, perhaps check that out, because that's going to determine how much you can build on your site and how high and how far you need to be from your neighbours, for instance. The settlement zone is, as I said before, quite a new zone for Kaipara. And we've introduced this to towns and villages which generally service rural areas. So it allows for some development and a more permissive set of land use provisions. So we're anticipating a mix of residential development as well as a bit of commercial activities happening in the settlement zone. In the commercial zones, generally this is going to be mixed use in terms of the rules that we've provided for there, and that applies to mostly our existing commercial and business centres of the Kaipara, but also we have included some additional blocks of land as well, and this could be for local suburban shops or some larger scale activities that may come about. So check those out if you're interested in that. We're hoping for more economic activity to happen in Kaipara, and this zone would certainly provide a range of opportunities for commercial activities and community activities as well. So we might see churches and community event centres and things like that happen. So commercial activities are not encouraged on residential zoned land, and generally this is because of the effects that are associated with those activities. So it's about protecting the amenity of the residential character. However, some business activities may be able to be undertaken from home, and this is something, if you do have a home business and you're wondering if you'll be able to move your home business, or if you are looking to establish a home business, we have provided some fairly flexible rules in the land use rules for home businesses, so check that out. But generally the commercial zone rules are for more intense commercial and business development. And as I said before, we're looking at providing for mixed use development, so a range of residential upstairs with commercial activities downstairs. So industrial zones, we have a wee bit of industrial activity across Kaipara, and it's proposed in this new exposure draft that we're going to split industrial activities into both heavy and light industrial zones. And the reason we're doing that is that we really want to limit the effects that heavy industry can have on neighbouring residential properties, and to free up valuable land for commercial activities. So heavy industrial zone is generally about providing for large scale activities where the effects of that activity are more significant. So those are generally 24/7 operations where they're going to have a lot of noise, lighting and traffic movements. So the heavy industrial zone caters for that intense level of effects. And in sites in these zones will generally be larger and they may be further away from sensitive environments such as the residential zones and sensitive activities. The light industrial zone aims to accommodate a range of activities that are generally a little bit lower in terms of the level of effects, and make sure that they're also compatible with surrounding zones. So again, you still have your effects like noise, lighting, hours of operation, etc., but they're generally not as big at industry activities as we expect in the heavy industry sites. So these are generally closer to commercial and residential zones. As I said before, open space zones are a new and quite exciting opportunity for Kaipara district. So these will replace the current reserve management units, or RMUs, that are in the operative district plan. And as I said before, these will be replaced with 3 open space zones. So the natural open space zone, the open space zone, and the sport and active recreation zone. So as I said, the NOZ zone, the natural open space zone, is about retaining its natural values within the area. So that will be native bush, for example, versus the open space zone, which is generally, it still has less built features. It could have natural, ecological, cultural, historic heritage values, but it's generally your parks and council facilities, etc., that are zoned open space. And they will hopefully have some good linkages to council's walking and cycling network as well. So pretty exciting new zone, that one. And then we've got the sports and active recreation zone, which is predominantly used for a range of indoor and outdoor sport and active recreational activities. So this is places like Sportsville, for example, where there's associated facilities and structures. And the rules are designed to provide for slightly larger scale buildings with car parking, lighting, and generally where there's going to be larger volumes of traffic and noise. Something else new for this exposure draft is special purpose zones. So this was a National Planning Standard direction. We have got some additional special purpose zones if you want to check those out. So they are the hospital zone, the multi-purpose zone, and the Estuary Estates Mangawhai Central Zone. So just a quick note on the Estuary Estates. That's the recent private plan change 78, which has just become operative. There are no provisions included in the draft at the moment, but certainly there will be when we release the proposed district plan next year. So if anyone's looking for provisions around that, unfortunately you still need to look at the operative district plan, but just note that that will become a special purpose zone in the new proposed district plan eventually. The hospital zone is a new thing, and that was really just to provide some specific provisions for the hospital activities in Dargaville. So if you're interested in that, check out those provisions. We have been working with the DHB on what they look like, and that's just to make sure that they can grow and undertake their activities with a reasonable level of effects in that zone. And you know, one of the reasons for that is it is a regional infrastructure site, so it's really important that we keep that specific. And the other one, the multi-purpose zone, I think I have a slide on that next. Yes, so the multi-purpose zone, this is a really exciting opportunity for Māori landowners that are that have Māori land, and there will be some a specific presentation, the Tangata Whenua webinar that we're going to do. We'll dive into a bit more detail, but just at a high level, the multi-purpose zone is really about bringing people back to their land and allowing them to build and develop. And we are looking at some fairly permissive papakainga housing and marae provisions there, and there will be a range of activities that can happen in there fairly permissively. So if you are a landowner, check that out. There's only a small proportion of the district that is actually Māori land, so we've got about 3% with Māori land tenure. So this doesn't apply across the whole district. It is quite unique and specific. And as I said, there is complementary provisions such as commercial and small scale activities that can happen on those sites. So check that out if you're interested. Right, rural zones. So many of the district obviously is rural, and so there'll be many of you looking at it from a rural perspective. So we have introduced the rural production zone, which is based around the productive land in the district. So some of you may know that council did some work. A report was called Kaipara some years ago, and that mapped our very highly productive soils. It was based on land use capability mapping for our class 1, 2, and 3 soils. And so by mapping this in the exposure draft, we're preempting a national policy statement that's due to come out from central government soon, which does require councils to map those highly productive soils anyway. So this work was done knowing that that was coming out, but it's a great way to kind of differentiate the productive soils on our rural zones versus the general rural zone, which is the balance of rural land. So there's some slight differences, and we'll talk through those a bit later on in terms of subdivision. But generally, the rural production zone is about protecting those high quality soils for rural production activities. So it could be agriculture, horticulture, etc. The rural lifestyle zone is a fairly new thing for Kaipara, and although by and large we actually do have by default a lot of rural lifestyle zones already, and we are proposing about a 1 to 2 hectare size range there for lifestyle lots, and there are some significant areas of rural lifestyle zoning to kind of cater for that lifestyle choice, as Paul and I said at the beginning of the webinar. So we will step you through that in terms of subdivision a little bit later. And as I said, the settlement zone, which has been included as a rural zone, this mostly is included in our small rural and coastal settlements across the district. So why? Well, I guess the key thing here is ensure that activities in the rural production and the general rural zone are used predominantly for primary production. So that's the key intention of differentiating those two zones. And as Paul said before, in terms of strategic direction, we're really wanting to direct rural lifestyle development to appropriate locations next to settlements in the Kaipara. And this little diagram gives you just an idea about the main uses and how the rural zones kind of fit together and what the anticipated outcomes of those are going to be. So I'm now going to hand back to Paul, who's going to take you through the zoning maps for each area, and we're just going to really highlight kind of the key things. But just before he does that, I'm just going to say that if anyone's interested in checking out their property and their zoning, please log on to our website and you can go to the interactive e-plan, type in your property address. All the zoning maps we're about to show you are online. And if you have any trouble, please do get in touch because we want to be able to help you. But over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Catherine. We are going to whoosh over the district and just have a look at certain of these areas. This particular northern part of the map, it is very clear. The sort of military green, those are the high productive soils. And then the more khaki color is the general zone. So you will see where the production is going to be. And then we look at the different towns. Let's go quickly to the towns. We have been talking to the public in these particular towns. This is Dargaville, and you'll see the green areas as being the high production soils, and in future we try to keep expansion of the town out of the high production soils. Dargaville is mainly shown as medium density residential. To the south are a little bit larger type of lots. So that is more or less the idea for Dargaville's growth over the next 10 years. And we would like you to tell us if the proposal that we make is the correct one or that we should move in a different direction. Next one. This is Tangitaroria. This is now one of the examples where we have a settlement zone where we change from a residential and business zone. You will know that there are some of the businesses along the state highway. These will all now become part of the settlement zone, and it gives people more freedom how they're going to use their particular property. Most or a large area is covered by the school at this point in time, plus the sports field. And I hope that we will have a stadium again. But this makes it easier for people to actually use their land for settlement purposes. Next one. And this is now a little bit to the north. Kaihu is suggested, and you will see there's most of it is purple, which means that is Maori land and development for Maori purposes, with a few pieces of land that are shown as settlement. But we would like to see that particular area to develop as a settlement area with Papakanga housing and those type of things on its way to the north along the Kaiu rail trail. Right, a little bit further to the south, Kopru, which is part of basically a suburb of Dargaville. We also identified this as Dargaville as medium density development, which is at this point in time quite sought after. And we have added a little bits to that particular aspect to the town, but you will see it is surrounded by the more darker green area. So those are the high productive soils. So we would like you to tell us if the expansions that we identify, if that is on the acceptable places, how this becomes a service center for the Poto Peninsula. Right, Poto itself, right to the south, has been made as a settlement area, and we have identified expansions for that settlement area right at the bottom of the Poto Peninsula. And the question is this the right location? We have had discussions with during this spatial plans with the Poto community, and there were certain requests that we should allow for expansion. We would like to hear from you if this is a viable and an acceptable direction that we suggest here. Next one. Right. Just to look at the southern area, you see here where the high productive soils are with the darker green. The bright green are the open space areas, which includes the nature areas. But you will also see orange blobs, which are all our settlements together right on the east, the Mangawhai area. And this shows you how rural our district is and how the settlements actually service the rural area. Next one. Right, moving a little bit south, we have here Ruawai. We have had discussions with the Ruai community. It is surrendered by high-class soils, and obviously in this particular case, we are also looking at the flood susceptibility and how we're going to mitigate that in this particular area. We've added a small portion at the back, which is in the present district plan, the operative plan, but to try and consolidate the business area and the industrial area, and that is what we try to do in the Ruawai area. Next one. Right, Matakoe is an interesting exercise. In this particular case, we have identified a portion of settlement, but to a great extent, we have surrounded the museum and the recreation area with lifestyle blocks in the Matakoe area, and not to have there a new settlement as such, but answer the question of a lifestyle block in that area on Matakoe. Next one. Right, Tinapai is, we have also changed that to a settlement zone and have added quite substantial areas for possible development. And that was an area that was heavily discussed in the spatial plans. How should that look in the future? And also we have been looking in this particular case to the hazard areas, the coastal hazard areas, as well as the erosion. And for that reason, it moves a little bit inland for future settlement development. Next one. Right, Paparoa was also very interesting. At this point in time in the operative plan, it has got zonings, residential zoning as well as a business zoning. We decided that it should rather be a settlement zoning or settlement area where the zoning is not going to be determined by the exact use. So it opens up a little bit more so that people can have mixed use development. We've also identified lifestyle blocks in this particular area to give direction of the growth. And we also have to remember that there are certain flood susceptible areas in the Paparoa area. But we have allowed for some development there because there are many people that would like to live in this rural situation. Thank you. Right, Pahi and Whakapiru, both of them are shown as settlement areas, again, which opens up a little bit more the type of use of that particular land. But we have to the north of Pahi, in the direction of Paparoa, etc. We've identified that for lifestyle blocks because it is already starting to be subdivided. And we need to know from you if that is the right direction or that you would like to contain that in the peninsula, in the Pahi Peninsula. Next one. Right, Mangatoroto. Mangatoroto has probably percentage-wise the biggest expansion because we see the station as a possible growth area when the railway line is connected to Northport. And in that particular case, we hope that freight does not have to go to Auckland, but that freight can go to Northport, and we hope that that industrial area will actually then capture some of the freight and some of the activities in the Kaipara and Northland area, so that that is where the development can take place. And for that purpose, there's quite a large area identified for medium development, and developers are ready to start developing those areas. To the north, okay, right, Kaiwaka, on the route on State Highway 1, for very much the same reason. To the north is an additional industrial area, and we would like to, on the crossroads towards Mangawhai, we would like to see that area to be developed. It is smaller than the spatial plan as identified, but it's still quite a large area, and we need to know if this is area acceptable to the people in that area. Right, Mangawhai, right to the east. Here you can clearly see the difference between the rural zones. The dark green or the darker green are all the areas of high production, high class soils. The more khaki color area is the general rural area. Obviously, the light green or the bright green areas, those are the open space and parts of the Brendurwans. And then we have identified in Mangawhai Heads as low density, and the Mangawhai Village as medium density, as well as a portion of large lot towards the southwest. We have had discussions with the Mangawhai people, and we do expect a reaction from the people. You also will see that there are large areas of lifestyle blocks. To a great extent, that is what's happening in Mangawhai. What we would like to see is to direct future lifestyle subdivisions in those areas and try and contain them, not to encroach into the high class soils and the general rural areas. Right.
Perfect, Paul. Do you want to
Yep.
carry on with the
Okay.
subdivision slides?
Right. Subdivision. The important part on the subdivision, and that's the theme that we started with, we know that subdivision influence the future pattern of land use, so we take that into account. Subdivision can have a significant impact on the amenity and the features of the Kaipara district, including the coastal environment. Now, we are going to have next week one on the natural environment, which includes the coastal environment. Coastal environment is going to be far smaller than it is in our present plan, and there might be some questions about that either tonight or next week when we deal with it. The district plan provides for a range of lifestyle options for the landowners across the district, and that's why we have various rural zones as well as various residential zones. The rural zone subdivision arranged in land holdings recognizes the best productive potential of that particular land. And then back to the residential area subdivision allows for intensification of the urban environment. Now, in the subdivision chapter, we have the objectives and policies. I have not written them all, but we have got policies 1 to 18. So there are 18 policies, but in short, subdivision layout and design to be optimum for that particular zone. And infrastructure provision should be complementary to the intended use of the land. And then boundary relocation and boundary adjustments are provided for. And we'll come when the land use, we'll talk about minor household units. Next one. Right, a bit of a busy slide. Let's just look at the proposed subdivision densities. The large lot residential densities, and you might have seen there's some in the Mangawhai area, are 1,000 square meters if reticulated and 3,000 square meters if they are unserviced. The low density residential, those were the yellow areas that we saw in Mangawhai Heads, 750 square meters to 1,000 square meters, and obviously they have to be serviced. Medium density residential, which is the highest density that we are proposing in the Kaipara area, and we need to know if you agree with that, is 400 square meters to 750 square meters. Those are the urban zones. Then the rural zones, the 4 different rural zones. The rural lifestyle one is 1 hectare minimum with a 2 hectare average, which is smaller than we have presently. The rural production zone is 20 hectares as a control activity, but as a discretionary activity, it can go down to 10 hectares, and you can have environmental benefit lot up to 3 at a 1 hectare with a 20 hectare balance, and the feature has to be 2 hectares minimum, and we need to know if that figure is acceptable, or a half a hectare of wetlands or water feature to qualify for a environmental benefit lot. And then we have got a new one, which is a reserve incentive lot of 1 hectare. We have, and we will talk about that when we talk about reserves. We would like to see more reserves or reserve priority areas along the coastline. And in some cases, we don't have the continuous development of the walkways along the coast, and people along the coast might have subdivide and provide for that walkway, and then they can have a benefit lot of 1 hectare. General rural is 20 hectare as a control activity, and restricted discretionary for more than 2 lots. The environmental benefit lots is the same as for the rural production, as well as the reserve incentive lot of 1 hectare. And then the last one, which is actually then between the rural and the urban areas, the settlement zones, is 1,000 square meters if they are serviced, or 3,000 square meters if they are not serviced. So most of them will probably be 3,000 square meters.
Paul, just to add to your densities there, the other thing that's not shown here, which you did mention before, is that we're also trying to provide in our package of rural subdivision options the boundary relocations and the boundary adjustments, which mean that you can still move your fence over as a controlled activity, and if you are going to do a boundary relocation, that will require subdivision as well. And yeah, I think that pretty much covered it, Paul. So thank you for that. And the reserve incentive lots, if people are looking at where those might be, they are flagged in the district plan maps as Esplanade priority areas. So check that out. But certainly we want to hear from you if you want to talk more about those lot size densities. We can definitely do that, and we want to hear what your views are on that. So back to you, Paul, just to give an overview of the provisions.
Right, a very busy slide, and I'm not going to discuss them in full, but these give the rules for every of those zonings. I would like to concentrate on the right-hand side, where you will see, and that was the intention of our elected members, that it should be enabling and it should be simple. And therefore, you will see that most of the activities are either controlled or restricted discretionary, with very few being discretionary. Maori purpose subdivisions would be discretionary. And then when we get to open space areas for those subdivisions would be discretionary. Most of the others are restricted discretionary, where the discretion is restricted to particular aspects that you have to look at. The only two places where you look at a non-complying activity is a minor household unit in the general residential area as well as the rural production area, because obviously the minor household unit, we don't want to farm with houses. We would like to farm on those particular properties. So although it's a non-complying activity, the rules in the Resource Management Act says that you have to pass one of two gateways. The one is it fits the policies of the district plan, or alternative, the environmental effects are no more than minor, and then a non-complying activity can still be allowed. So this is a table that gives us the intention of how do we control the subdivisions in the rural and residential areas. So it does give the opportunity for controlled activities and some restricted discretionary activities.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm just going to put a plug in here as well about anyone with a cross lease property that's wondering if they can do subdivision. That's been covered as a controlled activity in those boundary adjustment rules for the medium density, low density subdivision rules. And don't forget at the bottom, subdivision standards for all the zones are included in the standards at the bottom of the chapter. So don't forget to have a look at those as well, because they are really important in terms of the subdivision layout and design, which, as Paul said, we're looking to make sure we're achieving good subdivision across Kaipara. So thanks, Paul. I'm just going to talk very briefly now about the land use provisions. So land use is often another way of achieving additional densities across our zones. So the first one is just a quick reminder. We did cover this in some of our previous webinars, but in the four new rural zones, so rural production, the general rural lifestyle and settlement zones, we are providing for second and third residential units if you're in a rural zone. So that applies to the rural production and general rural. So for every 40 hectares that you have, you can actually have additional houses, and that is to provide for workers' accommodation, seasonal workers and farm workers, that type of thing. If you want to also put a minor residential unit on your property, we have very permissive permitted activities for up to 90 square meters, which is a minor unit. And then, as I said earlier, home businesses and visitor accommodation are also provided for as permitted activities in the plan. So yeah, make sure you check those out. And effectively in the rural zones, we're trying to be as enabling as we can for rural production activities and rural industry. So check these out and definitely give us some feedback. And make sure that you also have a little look at whether you might be a rural property, but you might also have some of those other overlays on your property as well, like the coastal environment, an outstanding natural feature or landscape, or hazards. So this might affect your potential for subdivision if you're inside those areas as well, and it might change that activity status that Paul was talking about earlier. So we've already said the settlement zone is definitely about mixed residential and commercial uses. So check out those land use provisions if you're interested in what you can do there, and make sure you check out your bulk and scale rules as well. So in the lost a slide. It's supposed to be a slide on the urban areas, but I'll just quickly brush on that as well. So just same as the rural zones, in the urban areas, we are providing for intensification of additional minor units, so 80 square meters in the urban zones, and certainly in the urban zones we're looking at infill housing as well. So if you're interested in what you might be able to do on your property, and you think you might meet the minimum size, say in the medium density, it could be that you can subdivide and put additional housing on your property there. So that's pretty much it from us on subdivision and zoning. Hopefully that was a helpful overview. And as I said, if you're keen to talk to us about your property in particular, we're still running our chat to the planner session. So book one of those with us, and certainly get your feedback in. So feedback is due on the Friday the 16th of September. We are still running some additional webinars. So next week we are covering general district-wide matters and natural environment values. And then the final week we'll have the Tangata Whenua, Mana Whenua webinar there as well. So if you're interested in those, definitely you'll see us back here again next week. Now we're just going to take some questions. And so Paul, I think you've got a couple of questions that you had come in earlier. Did you want to maybe respond to one of those?
One question was, and that's why I refer to the coastal environment, is the comparison between the operative plan and the proposed or the draft that we are looking at now. Now, interesting is that the operative plan in the coastal environment, which covers a very large area, especially around the Mangawhai area, and it used to be covered as a catchment area. In those particular areas, you had 20 hectares within the coastal area and 12 hectares outside the coastal area. Now we have got 20 hectares and the coastal area has shrunk quite significantly. But in the urban areas, the difference is quite bigger. Uh, the operative plan is within the coastal area, 1,000 square meters, and outside of the coastal area is 600 square meters. And obviously, we are now changing to even the 400 and the 750 square meters. So the changes in the coastal area has got a significant influence on how subdivisions are going to, or what the size of subdivisions are going to be allowed. That was one of the questions that I had. And the other one was, especially those who are already on lifestyle blocks, the question was, can I still subdivide off my rural lifestyle block because it's now smaller allotments, 1 hectare with 2 hectare average? Can I further subdivide it? And yes, there's the opportunity to subdivide the lifestyle block to 1 or 2 hectares, and you would be able to have more subdivisions on those existing lifestyle blocks. And we would encourage that those areas would be better used for lifestyle blocks than starting to go into the new or the rural areas and create newer lifestyle blocks. So those particular aspects of continuous development is contiguous development is important to keep the zonings tightly controlled.
Perfect, Paul. I've got a question for you here. If I object to my zoning from the exposure draft, what do I need to do?
Well, the first one is now is the first opportunity to give us feedback and tell us why you think that it should be different. And to debate or to talk about it at this point in time is far better than waiting until the proposed plan is notified somewhere next year, because then you have to do a submission and that becomes part of a long legal process. And we would rather know earlier than later if we have got it right or if we should change those particular aspects. So it is not a matter of you object to it, but you give us feedback, what your thoughts are, what it should be, and what your reasons for that would be. That would help us then to either adapt or change the plan accordingly.
Thanks, Paul. I've got a question here that I think I can answer. So subdivision, if I'm looking at subdivision now for my property and what my options are, How do I know what the changes are going to be and what do I need to do? So my advice is if you're looking at subdivision of your property now, do go and speak to the consents team to work out what your options are. It's going to take council a couple of years to get the proposed plan rules through the process. So even though we're at the exposure draft right now, and you might see that you've got an opportunity perhaps for environmental lots, but you might be kind of keen to know what you can do now, go and talk to the consents team, but also know that there could be more opportunities in the future. There could also be fewer options in the future. So just yeah, you just need to weigh up whether you want to do something now or in the future in that space. But it is going to take a couple of years until the plan is ready to go as far as being legally enforceable rules. So at the moment it's draft, there's no legal effect whatsoever for these rules, and we have to work through the process when the proposed plan comes out next year. So you'll be able to put submissions in at that stage and see that through to the decisions. So back to you, Paul. Have you got any more questions over there?
Let's see. No, I don't know. Maybe Mike has something to say.
No, thanks, Paul. I was just going to reiterate the point that Catherine just made, that these proposals in our exposure draft do have no legal effect. So people still have to rely on what's in the operative district plan. So you might see that your property is suggested to be rezoned from, for example, rural to residential. That does not mean that you can now subdivide it as a residential property. It's still a rural zoned property, and you still have to rely on the operative district plan rules at this stage. Thank you.
Cool.
I've got
Megan, has there been any more questions? No, nothing in the chat box. Sorry, Paul. Yep.
there was one question regarding to the densities, and if the densities are realistic. The residential densities is 400 square meters realistic. Is it too small for a normal house, or should it be smaller for multiple housing? And what is our view regarding to higher densities as such? My reaction to that is we are not the Auckland type of development, so it is still relative low density, but 400 square meters for Kaipara is already quite a increase in density. And I think that it will create the opportunity of say if it's an 800 or 1,000 square meter lot, depending on where the house stands, that you would be able to subdivide an additional allotment. And therefore, I think that 400 square meters is probably achievable, and I don't think it is too dense for the Kaipara district as such.
Thanks, Paul. And just following on from that point, and as Catherine and Paul have both touched on earlier on in the presentation, what we're trying to do here is actually provide a range of housing and lifestyle choices through the exposure draft. So the operative district plan has one residential zone and one rural zone. The exposure draft is suggesting 3 residential zones and 3 rural zones and a settlement zone as well. So it's all about choice for our residents at Kaipara. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Michael. So I think on the basis that there's no further questions coming through the chat at present, I'm going to close this out with a karakia. So thanks everybody for your participation tonight. And as we said before, if you've got any questions, please don't be shy to get in touch, and we really want your feedback. So please remember to get that in by the 16th of September.
E karakia whakamutunga, Kia tau ngā manaakitanga a te mea naro, ki roto ki tēnā o tātou. Kia māhea te hua mākiki, toi te kupu, toi te mana, toi te aroha, ki hei mauri ora.